Hello and welcome to the World Wanderers podcast, your source for travel stories, travel destinations, and travel philosophy.
I'm Amanda.
I'm Ryan.
And we're your hosts. Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of the World Wanderers podcast. On this episode, we have a couple different people who are sharing their best travel stories.
Yeah, we've got a compilation episode for you guys that we're actually really excited about. So, you'll recognize a few of the names as we go through. We've got a few people you've heard before on the podcast and a few people who are listeners who you haven't heard on the podcast, but all of them have great travel stories. And then you'll also find our best travel stories interspersed in there. The travel stories cover all sorts of topics, ranging from the uplifting, happy version of travel stories to the downright crazy version of best travel stories.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting because when you kind of say best travel story, it means so many different things. Even with us brainstorming, it's like, well, we've had so many different experiences. So is it like your best adventure story, your scariest story, your craziest, wackiest travel story? And so it's really cool because people kind of gave us all different variations of their best travel story.
Yeah, but they definitely do tend to skew towards like the
crazy side.
Yeah, or just like, people best travel story most interesting. It's usually not something that was actually pleasant at the moment when you were living it out.
Yeah, definitely. That's a fair point for sure.
So the first story comes to you from Fyfe Barraclough, who is a guest a few weeks ago on the podcast to talk about his business, Alpaca Life Clothing. And Fyfe's story is from the end of his first really big backpacking trip. Him and a couple friends cruised into the Ukraine a little bit before all the craziness was kicking off there, but I think it's always been a little bit crazy. And they were staying in a shady part of town and ended up going on a bit of a crazy adventure and coming out with a very cool travel story. So here's Fyfe.
All right, so we've got Fyfe here with us, and he's going to tell us about his most ridiculous travel story.
So I was in Donetsk, Ukraine, which is kind of where all the shit's going down in the Ukraine right now. And this is 2012. And I was with two buddies and we bussed into town and we were staying at an Airbnb. And this Airbnb was kind of in the ghetto. And by kind of, I mean, it definitely was. And we been traveling, so there was a gym across the street, so we decided, we'll go hit the gym, kind of trying to stay in shape while we traveled and drank a lot of beer. But it was going to be $12 or something, so we're fuck that, we'll just work out in the park. So we
$12
go to the park. So we went to, there was a park in front of this big apartment building that we were staying in, and there's chin-up bar and stuff like that. So we were doing some chin-ups. And this massive, shirtless dude comes over, and it's 1 in the afternoon. He's absolutely wasted. And he starts trying to talk English to us, but it's so garbled, and I don't think he knows much. And he's drinking vodka out of a paper bag. So essentially, 5 minutes after talking with this guy, he's arm wrestling all of us because he's got to show off how strong he is. And even though he's twice as big as me, he was yeah, we're going to arm wrestle because I just have to make sure that you guys know he's strong.
Yeah.
Yeah, he is legit. So we arm wrestle him. That was all fun and games. And then we didn't even realize it, but there's a little tent, pop-up big built-in tent, and they sell vodka and snacks. So he invited us over to grab some vodka.
I like how this starts with the GM and then you end up drinking.
So it's 1 p.m. and we go over and he orders some vodka, and it's a Dixie cup, and it's 4 fingers of vodka.
Wow.
And he shoots it boom, down the hatch, and he chases it with tomato juice. And I was oh God, this is not going to end well. So I choked down the first one, and he bought another one. So we tried to do that. I could hardly choke that one down. And then we decided to buy him a drink. So we sit down at the picnic bench, And a couple other guys come over and start chatting with us. One of them speaks like no English. The other one speaks a little bit of English. At that point, I realized that the day was probably going to be kind of ridiculous with the way it was going, because it was like 2 p.m. We were drinking with a bunch of locals. So I went up and grabbed my camera from the room, and I came back, and my 2 buddies were like ghost white and looking visibly like nervous. And I was like, what the fuck? Like, what's happening? And they like kind of like nod, and I look over, and the big dude that arm wrestled us is like knocked out cold, bleeding up against the tent. And I was like, whoa, like what the fuck? Apparently what had happened was the shirtless dude like bumped into this other old dude's table like one too many times and like spilt his beer. And the old dude got up and just clocked him. And then shirtless dude was about to get up and start fighting. And this other dude that we were hanging out with ran over and like savagely like punched him a couple times and then kicked him in the head.
Oh my God.
So my buddies were like, what the fuck? So I was kind of like, okay, maybe we should get out of here. But as we like, this has all happened like really, really fast. But the guy that like punched him and like kicked him in the head, like went over and grabbed water and like cleaned him up. And I guess it's just kind of like as you do in the Ukraine. I don't know. It was like, he was like, oh yeah, he just got too drunk and he was going to like fight this old guy. So I just had to like kick him in the head so he didn't like fight this guy. And like cleaned him up, poured water on him, and like just kind of like sent him home. So we're like, okay, I guess like when in the Ukraine, I don't know. So we kept drinking with these guys for a while, at this like picnic bench. And we decided at one point that it would be a good idea to go up to our room to drink more instead of being outside. So we like go up to our place and like just to get a picture, like the elevator is like the scariest elevator I've ever been in. It looks like people have died in there many times. So we're going up the elevator. We get off into our room, kind of drinking some more, and they were smoking a little bit of weed. And like by smoking a little bit of weed, do you know what like a depth charge is?
No.
It's like you have like a 4-liter or like a pop bottle, like a 2-liter pop bottle, and you cut off the bottom.
Oh yeah.
And you like suck the vapor and like do massive hits of weed.
Wow.
And so I watched them do like 6 in a row.
Oh my God.
And I was like, how are you guys still alive? I don't know. Maybe it was just really weak weed or something. I don't know. Anyways, so I was like, holy crap. Like, okay. And then the dude that, so we'd been drinking a little bit, and then the dude that spoke absolutely no English, was like leaving, and I just assumed that we were going to go get snacks. So I went out with him because we only had one key to the place, and he had to have a key to get in. So I went with him. I thought we were going to go back to like the little tent and grab some snacks. And then we start walking the opposite direction, and I was like, okay, maybe we're like, that place is closed. We'll just get something at this other place. And we're like walking across this big kind of like park to this other like park bench. It's probably like a 10-minute walk. And we would walk up, and there's a group of like pretty hard looking dudes and this chick. And there's one dude, he's like dressed in like a tracksuit, like gangster style, and he's got a cane. And then there's this other massive dude behind him and this chick. And I'm like, okay, what the fuck is going on right now? And I was like, okay, this can't be like, I don't know. We'll just see where this goes. I'm drinking. I sobered up pretty quick at that point because I was like, I have no idea what's going on right now. So the guy I was with, his attitude totally changed. He got all like jokey, even though I couldn't like understand what he was saying. And he wanted to buy weed off this guy who was definitely like a gang leader or something. And so I was like, okay, let's get this fucking shit over with and like go back to the room and hang out so I don't die. And they're like sitting chatting and whatever. Buddy tries to give the tracksuit guy some money, and he's like, no, you don't give it to me, you give it to the girl. So he gives it to the girl because it's like, you can't like implicate the leader guy, I guess. I don't know. And then I was like, okay, sweet. He gave him the money. Like, let's get out of here. And then the taxi rolls up and I was like, oh shit. And at this point I'm like, I'm too far in. Like, if I just leave now, that's kind of weird. So I was like, okay, shit, I'm just going to like roll with it. And like, we all got into this taxi.
Oh my God.
And
no.
drove for about, I was like, but you know, like, I didn't feel threatened at all. Like, they were quite nice and there was no reason for them to like do anything to me. But either way, I was like, oh shit, like, Fyfe, what are you doing? So we get in the taxi, we drive for like 5 or 10 minutes to this back alley. They all go inside to this house. And meanwhile, like, I got out and pretended to go for a pee. And like, I did go for a pee, but I was like secretly taking a picture of the taxi and like the license plate because I was drunk and like needed to be sneaky and just in case something happened kind of thing. I don't know what I was thinking. It wouldn't have done anything. And they come back, we jump into the taxi and they drop us off right in front of the house. And I was like, oh shit, like, they worked out. That's good. So that's pretty much the end of the story, but we found out later when we were taking a bus with these idiots to go watch a soccer game that they are in like some intense gang.
Oh.
Like really intense. Like people on the bus were like, yeah, you probably shouldn't be hanging out with those guys. And they had like spider tattoos, which apparently is like the gang sign. So anyways, it was like a ridiculous day. I went on a drug run with guys in the Ukrainian gang. And somehow made it out. And then like the next day, they showed up and wanted to hang out with us more. And we were just like, nope, we're leaving town. See you later. Oh,
wow. That's so crazy.
it was, it was a pretty silly day.
Yeah, that's really intense.
Yeah. But like throughout the whole thing, like they were pretty friendly. I never really felt threatened or anything, but it was also like that could have just gone terribly wrong.
Yeah. I mean, getting in the taxi, I was like, the story is like getting crazy, crazier.
It probably wasn't the smartest idea, but I don't know. You get like, I don't know, you guys have traveled enough. You get vibes.
Yeah.
You get like a vibe, people and places and things. And there was no like major red flags. And I was wasted, so.
Other than like the assaults that happened earlier and the.
Yeah.
The sketchy taxi, you know, no major signs.
Yeah.
Though. No, that's awesome though.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us.
You're welcome.
So when Fyfe told us that story, I was actually like sitting there being like, what the hell were you thinking? Like, why would you ever get in that taxi? Like, it's just so absurd.
Yeah. And it's the type of thing that like the type of like shenanigans that you like never get into when you're traveling as a couple.
Yeah. Or I don't know, maybe just with me. I'm sure there's girls that would get you into that situation, but definitely not me. I mean, I'm into a little adventure, but not getting into a taxi to go get drugs.
Yeah. So who's next?
So next we've got my really good friend Chelsey Orth, and she just has a short, quick, sort of hilarious travel story that I'm really excited to share with you guys. All right, I've got Chelsey Orth here. She's going to tell us her best travel story.
Okay, so we were in Belize hanging out, and we had just gotten back from a marine reserve where we went diving on Glover's Reef Atoll and realized that it had been raining for a while, so we got flooded out. We were on a catamaran, so I guess a catamaran boat, and just hanging out. So we had a taxi come pick us up, and by that time we were just starving and hungry, and that never makes a happy traveler.
No.
We finally made our way down to Placencia and went to change out of our wet clothes from all day and go get dinner. So we show up at this bar, and we're just kind of out of it. We're sipping on our first drink, and I look down at this rectangle container, this rectangle square on the table, and I'm like, man, they have sugar on the table at a bar? That's cool. Is that sugar? It looks like sugar. Okay, and it's colored like raw sugar, maybe a light brown tint to it. And so I'm like, oh, I'm going to try it. I try it, and my eyes go wide, and I spit it out, and I look at my friend Eva. I go, I just ate ashtray. And I'm just like, this is an ashtray. Why would they have sugar at the bar? Why would they have sugar there? What was I thinking? You know, a little delirious from not eating all day after a drink, I guess. It was really funny. I don't know.
That's a good story.
Yeah.
I was thinking that it might be like sand or salt.
Right.
Ashtray didn't even cross my mind, though.
Well, rectangle, and it had the divots for the cigarettes in it, you know. I don't smoke cigarettes, so I wasn't paying attention to that. Yeah.
You were just hungry. Your body told you wanted sugar.
Oh, sugar. Okay, cool. Why sugar at the bar? For your drink? I don't know.
Did anyone see you do this other than Eva?
It was Eva, and we laughed for a good 15 or 20 minutes after the whole day, and it was just funny.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Thanks for sharing.
Of course.
So that is definitely one of the most amusing travel stories I've ever heard. And I feel like as travelers, we can relate to this like sense of being so hungry and so tired and so just like, and then doing something really dumb. I feel like I've definitely had those moments. What about you?
No. Never happened to me.
I mean, it happens more to me than it happens to you, but.
Yeah, no, definitely. I've had quite a few of those. When you're like in a foreign situation and like things that are just like incredibly obvious don't seem that obvious because you're kind of questioning everything. Like foods, you're like, I don't know how to eat this, what I'm supposed to do with it.
Yeah, definitely.
For sure. So next up, we have a story from friend of the show, Olivia Van Wormer. Olivia and Amanda and I got connected through Praxis, which you would have heard about on some previous episode of the show. That network, she's currently participating in the Praxis program, which I had participated in previously. So we got connected through that. She has a lot of travel experience and some cool travel stories. And so she joined us to share one about trekking in Nepal.
Yeah, and I love how Olivia's story is a little bit different from the craziness of Fyfe's story and the hilariousness of Chelsey's story. And it's got more of a heartwarming, sort of touching feel to it. So without further ado, here's Olivia.
Okay. So when you asked me to be a part of this episode, I had all these different stories that came to mind. And I was noticing that they had kind of this central theme. And the theme was basically that they all related to moments of discomfort or fear or embarrassment. And I was wondering why that was. And I realized really that that was what travel had taught me, that it had showed me that, you know, traveling is not this glamorous thing. It's very real, and it causes you to continuously be in the present moment. And that is what I think is so addicting and what I love about it. So anyway, this particular story, although it's not the most maybe exciting or funny, is the one that has stuck with me, these last 2 years. And it's the one that I kind of fall back on when I'm telling stories. So I decided that this was the one. So it requires a little bit of backstory as well, and it's a little bit confusing, so I will try to make it as straightforward as possible. Basically, my mom, when she was growing up, had two very, very close friends named Juliana and Verena. And after college, Juliana and Verena decided to travel, and they were in Nepal together. And they were doing the Everest Base Camp trek, and Verena, about 2 weeks into the trek, got meningitis, and she died about 3 days later. Whoa. So I had kind of grown up, So I had grown up hearing about Verena, and I had this like strange kind of feeling of connection towards her, and maybe it was just that I had never been able to meet her, and clearly, you know, it was somebody that my mom had cared greatly about. So anyway, that's the backstory. And then we're going to jump to about a year and a half ago. I was traveling around the world, and it just so happened that my friend Emmett was also traveling around the world at the same time. And Emmett is the son of Juliana. So we were sending letters back and forth, you know, talking about our experiences, and we were like, you know what, let's meet up at some point. So we decided that we were going to meet in Nepal. And so we I fly in from Cambodia, and he takes this like 35-hour bus ride up to Kathmandu and wakes me up in the hostel at 6 o'clock in the morning, and we go out for breakfast, and we're talking about traveling and about life and about Verena. And we had kind of mentioned the idea of doing the base camp trek before, but we didn't really know if we wanted to spend the money on it. It's really expensive, and we had kind of just been like, I'm not sure. But we were sitting there and we were talking about things and just talking about how, fleeting life can be. And we're like, you know what? Let's just do this trek. Let's make it happen. And so we decided that we were going to do it, and we decided we were going to start it in 2 days. So we spent basically the next 48 hours frantically getting together all of the gear and finding a Sherpa. And we ended up meeting this guy at our hostel who decided he was going to join us for the trek. And in that 2-day span, I started doing some research about the trek. And I was like, I'm from Colorado. I've hiked a bunch of 14ers. I can do this. But as I start to read a little bit about it, I become a little bit more skeptical. And I also start researching about the flight into Lukla, which is where most people start the trek. And I don't know if it's the most or one of the most dangerous airports to fly into in the entire world, but it's on the top list. And it's dangerous because the runway is incredibly short and it basically hangs off the side of a cliff. So if you misjudge the runway, you either slam into the cliff or into the end of the runway. So I'm reading all of this, and I get a very sweet email from my dad just saying, I'm so excited that you're doing this trek, and good luck, and we'll be thinking about you. And I write him back this kind of ridiculous letter being like, I love you guys, and if anything happened to me, I just want to let you know that you all mean so much to me. And, looking back on it was a little bit ridiculous, but I was definitely a little bit terrified, honestly. So anyway, we set off the next day. We make it into the airport just fine. And in this time, I also found out that Verena had written a letter right before she had passed away to, I think it was her boyfriend or somebody like that, basically saying that she was the happiest she had ever been, that she had just had the most amazing time doing this trek, and that she just completely fallen in love with Nepal. And so I was just like, okay, I'm going to do this as similar to Verena as I can. I'm going to just have the time of my life, and I'm going to make this, the most extraordinary experience. So we get into Lukla. We meet with our guide, this very, very sweet man named Gopal. And he basically takes us on this 2.5-week incredible journey. I recently was talking to my sister about it, and she was just like, it seems to me like it was an extreme of every emotion. And I was like, it really was. It was an extreme of excitement, of fear, of exhaustion, just kind of all of these things combined into these amazing several weeks. And so on the trek, we got to go to Namche, which is where Verena had been buried, and spent the day looking for her grave. We ended up not finding the grave. We realized later that it had been moved to build a road, but we decided that we were going to kind of finish the trek for her and make it up to base camp for her. So we get up to base camp and make this kind of little grave or altar, I guess, for her right after watching an avalanche happen 2 mountains over, which was pretty crazy. And, the next morning we get to go and watch the sunrise over Everest at 18,000 feet. Definitely top 10 best moments of my life. Yeah, it was really amazing. And so we make it back down to the airport, to Lukla Airport, because you kind of do the trek in a circle. And the weather is so bad that we can't fly back to Kathmandu. So we spend 5 days waiting for a flight out of there. I got to read Into Thin Air out loud to the 2 guys I was traveling with, which was also a cool experience. And on the 5th day, as we're getting ready to fly out, I start to feel a little bit sick. And so we make it back into Kathmandu after probably the most terrifying flight of my life. I mean, just so much turbulence, and the runway was completely fogged over, so I couldn't see anything. So I get back and I'm already feeling slightly shaky and a little bit out of it. And we get to our hotel, and I just write my mom a really quick email saying, hey, I'm back in Kathmandu, and just so you know, I'm feeling a little bit sick. So she sees this and is clearly just starting to, panic a little bit and is just a little bit worried. And so she sends me this list of all the symptoms of meningitis. And so I'm reading them through, and it just so happens that like 90% of the symptoms of meningitis are like the flu. And so I definitely had the flu, but one of the differences is that your neck gets incredibly stiff and you can't move it. So basically, I just am spending the day constantly making sure that I can move my neck and that it doesn't feel too sore. And as the night goes on, it starts to get a little bit more stiff and a little bit more stiff. And I can't tell if it's me projecting that my neck feels stiff because I know that this is a symptom or what it is. But so I'm dealing with all of this, and I get 2 emails from 2 of my very close friends, one of which says, I had this awful feeling about you the past day, and I'm just very worried about you. Can you please tell me that you're all right? And so I get that, and then another email from a friend saying, I had this dream that you were lost in the mountains and I couldn't find you. Are you okay? So this literally happens within like maybe 5 minutes of each other. And so I'm just sitting in this hotel room with Emmett, just like, what should I do? Should I go to the hospital? Should I stay here? And I have a slight distrust of doctors, so I usually kind of try to avoid hospitals. And so we're like, okay, you know what? We're just going to sit through the night. We're going to be fine. Emmett's like, I'm just going to be here. If you need anything, we'll get you to the hospital if we need to. So I fall asleep and kind of have this night of tossing and turning. And I wake up the next morning and I feel better. And I'm just like, oh my God, thank God. I cannot believe that, this happened. I'm fine. I'm okay. And so me and Emmett sit and we just talk about it, because he's kind of like, why do you think that you got sick at this exact, at the very end of the trek? And there's this whole relation with Verena. And, and so I was sitting there and I was thinking about it. And, as cliche as it sounds, and I'm not going to specifically say this, but it kind of made me feel, like to remind myself that I do have to live every day, as if it's your last, or just to be able to accept all the opportunities that come to you and face your fears as they come along. And it really kind of instilled that in me. And I think it's something that I fall back on a lot, is this memory and this experience to, whenever I have a moment where I'm a little nervous about doing something or not sure, I kind of remember that. I'm like, all right, I can do it. So anyway, that's the story.
That's an incredible story. That was really cool to hear. So thank you for sharing that with us.
Yeah,
you're welcome.
I can definitely relate to that feeling of like having this like really solid landmark of experience where you felt like all this like anxiety and uncertainty, and then when you are back home and you're dealing with something that is fairly small in the bigger picture, you can kind of like rest on that thing and be like, okay, it's fine. This isn't that big of a deal.
Exactly. Yeah. No, it's so true. I think that's what's so cool about traveling, is it kind of puts your life at home into such, like, it's such a juxtaposition of life at home, when you'll be dealing with these things. So yeah, definitely a cool experience.
Yeah, we've also both been sick abroad, and it's way scarier when you're away. Like, when you're in a country where there's a risk of getting something that's way worse than just like the common cold or, the flu, it's just so much scarier. And we even, we interviewed a guest on Tuesday who was saying like his daughter got sick in Ecuador, and at home, had she been that sick, he would have just been like, yeah, she's got the flu. But because they're in Ecuador, he's like, oh my God, does she have dengue fever? Like, is she going to die? She's only 4. So I think that's definitely a relatable
terrifying
thing.
Yeah, and not being able to get to good healthcare, to have to worry about like, oh, I might have to fly to Thailand or, whatever it is. It's just kind of it puts your life into a slightly different perspective, for sure.
Yeah, and there's one last point about how it's funny, like, all these times which are uncomfortable and you wouldn't really like choose to have, but they end up being some of the stories that you tell the most later on. It's like you said at the start, those kind of stories of discomfort that you end up sharing the most.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I usually, cause you definitely learn the most out of those situations, I think, or, you kind of feel that like aha moment when you get through it and you're like, yeah, I survived that. I lived through it, whether it was as big of a deal as you thought it was, or if it wasn't.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to share your story with us, Olivia.
You're so welcome. Thank you guys. I'm glad to be a part of this episode.
And if you want to check out a bit more of Olivia's adventures, you can check out her website, oliviavanwormer.com, where she kind of digs into travel and all sorts of other cool topics. So definitely go check that out.
Yeah, and our next travel story is coming from Katie Roll, who's another one of my really good friends. And before she was a yoga teacher, she was a international training manager for Tivana, and she spent weeks over in the Middle East and then came back to the U.S. So she'd be like 3 weeks on, 1 week back, or 4 weeks on, 1 month back, all sorts of different stuff. And her life was just like a crazy adventure for a couple years. And so she shares this pretty interesting story while being over in the Middle East. So here's Katie. All right, so I've got Katie Roll here with me. She's going to tell me her best travel story.
I don't know if it's my best, but I definitely, when you told me about this, it definitely popped into my head. So I was in Kuwait, and I was only like on day 3, and this was my first time over in the Middle East, day 3 or so working over there. And I'm taking taxis around, I'm getting back to my hotel and then back to the office headquarters I was working for. Everything was going pretty smoothly, despite the fact that people said there's some really awful traffic and drivers and just get used to it, it's just how it rolls. And I did experience it on day 3. I got dropped back off at my hotel, and the taxi driver said, hey, so instead of getting out on the right side next to the curb, something about I pulled too close to the curb, you're not going to be able to open the door. I was like, no problem. Even though you're never supposed to get out on the left side, I start to open the door. And of course, in that moment that I swing the left door open and I step my ankle out, this big, gigantic, like totally blitzed out, like got every detail on it, gigantic GMC Suburban, because I love American cars, comes through and takes the door off the taxi. And I still have my ankle there, and I'm like, oh my god, what just happened? So it seemed like it was slow motion. I was checking to make sure I still had my foot.
Yeah.
But like it crumpled like tinfoil backwards, and it ripped it off and then left like this little stub of aluminum. And then the next thing I know, people are just going off in Arabic, and the driver of the big Suburban comes out, and he's local Kuwaiti gentleman, and he's just tearing apart the taxi driver because he's an expat, and there's that whole weird relationship going on, and and I did not know what to do. So I took my things and kind of just walked into the hotel, and I was completely stunned, and long story short, kind of like called one of my colleagues and was like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. Am I supposed to like hang out? Like what's the legality of it? And she was just like, well, I guess you're just going to have to fix it or something. Like the way it works around here is you just kind of pay under the table to get people off your back. And I was like, well, I already stepped away from it because I was just so in shock. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. She's like, well, maybe he won't come back. And that's what I was hoping, and like went back to my room, and I didn't venture out. I'm like, he'll be waiting for me. He'll want me to pay for his door, even though I did what he told me to do. Sure enough, the next day, the same taxi driver was there, and he was like, oh, madame, please, like, you don't understand, my boss is going to kill me, and like all this stuff. You need to, any money that you have. And it's as bad as I felt, I knew that the scam, could possibly be that I would be giving him cash and that was just a sob story. And that it wasn't for real. So I just said, I'm really sorry. I can't help you out there. And I was scared too.
Yeah, you almost lost a foot.
Yeah, I mean, even to this day, when like people just kind of nonchalantly swing open doors, whether it's in a parking lot or they're getting dropped off at like valet or something, and it's back home, and I'm like, please watch your door. Or like, did you look behind you? There could be a big GMC Suburban with like really huge rims driving way too fast under an awning, and they can take your door and they can accordion fold it, and then it goes off. So yeah, like I have a lot of cool, weird mental images from that moment. But that was the thing that I thought of when you said weird travel story.
Yeah.
I had definitely better picturesque moments that are beautiful and make a great little tell, but that was the best travel story.
Yeah, that's an awesome story. I feel like that's like nothing I've ever experienced before. So do you know what happened, like, with the taxi driver and, like, the GMC Suburban?
I think sort of the owner of the taxi service, there's like 2 or 3 reputable ones, and he was one of, those 2 services. I think they kind of figured something out under the table. That's how it goes, because you don't want to get, like, the government involved in anybody and anything over there. So they just kind of paid something, is what I understood, to have happened, because the guy did come around a couple more times and asked me for money to avoid having it taken from his wages, I think. Sort of that / the service having to pay for it.
Okay.
But again, I was like, okay, I just have to keep telling myself it's not my fault, even though I'm not the type of person to just be like, fix it yourself, my friend, but I kind of had to.
Yeah. Wow, that's crazy.
Like slow motion, but also a blur.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing that.
Of course.
So it's like another one of the crazy variety moments that really stands out after traveling.
Yeah, definitely.
So next up we have Shelly and Al McCullough
from Sell Your Stuff,
who were on a previous episode of the podcast. And have an awesome website, sellyourstuff.com, with like lots of good resources about minimalism and house sitting and all that fun stuff. But their travel story comes from Central America, where they spent a lot of time. I think it was Panama, right?
Yeah, it was on a border run from Panama.
And some quad difficulties. So without further ado, here's Shelly and Al.
All right. So, well, you asked us about our best travel story. So we narrowed it down to 3 that we had. The first one would have been the journey through the road to Hana on Maui. The second one was in Meningitis. We went on a bike tour through the city. We hired a guide, and we went all day for biking through the city, which was super cool, just riding through the streets and climbing the mountains in the city. And then the third one we came up with was quadding in Bocas del Toro, Panama. So Al's going to tell you exactly what was our favorite travel story.
So, yeah, we had to do a border run from Panama because you can only stay there for 6 months.
Okay.
And so we decided, well, we're not going to do what everybody else does, where they just, hop across the border, come back the next day, and it's like this 24-hour chaotic adventure. We're like, let's make an adventure out of this. So we'd never been to Bocas del Toro. It's on the Caribbean side of Panama, and it borders Costa Rica, Cisola, and Puerto Viejo, Costa Rica, is the nearest tourist area. Anyway, like, let's spend a few days in Bocas. So we go there, not really a plan, just like, we'll just figure stuff out when we get there. It's a tourist area, so we'll just see what there is to do. So on the first full day there, we see some quadding places where you can rent a quad, 4-wheelers. And we're like, we've never done that before. We should try this, So we see one place, and it's $90 for 4 hours or something. And then we see another place that's $70 for 4 hours. So naturally, we picked the $70 for 4 hour one, and that ended up being our first mistake. So we're riding around the island. We're having a great time, This is awesome. I forgot to mention, I'm wearing these flip-flops, and you have to change gears by, like, kicking up on the sort of clutch at the bottom. Mm-hmm. So it's starting to, like, make a red spot on my foot. I'm like, all right, well, 4 hours, this won't be too bad. Anyway, we're riding around. Like I said, we're having a great time. We're splashing through puddles. We're on the beach. We actually wiped out at one point. We had to pull it back on the path. But yeah, like I said, we're having an awesome time. So we say, okay, well, let's get back on the main road and we'll tour over to the other side of the island. And we got a few hours of this thing still. So we go to the complete opposite end of the island. And we're just walking along the beach, taking some pictures and stuff. And I think it's called Bocas del Drago. Yeah. So again, opposite end of the island. We go to get back on after just walking around, and we've got a flat tire. That kind of sucks. So what do we got to do about this? Well, there's got to be a number on this thing. We'll just phone them. So we're looking all over the quad for a phone number of the outfitter, and we're like, well, we don't see it anywhere. We're looking everywhere on this thing, and there's no phone number to call them in case you have some sort of mishap like this, right? So like, great, this just sucks. So we've got a 3-wheeler at this point. So now we're trying to drive this thing on the road, and it's pulling to the right the whole time because it's on the flat's on the right side. So we're constantly being pulled. I'm fighting this thing. My forearms are completely tired after this journey because I'm just fighting to keep this thing on the road at like, 10 miles an hour or something. People are passing us, honking and waving. Yeah, we're having a great time here, guys. Finally, this other kid who we'd met before, just passing on our quads, we wave him down, and he's with the other outfitter, the $90 one, and he's got a phone on him. And the problem is we don't have a phone number. And not only that, but we couldn't even get a signal where we were because we were on the complete opposite side of the island. So anyway, he's like, all right, well, let me call my guys, and then they'll call your guys, and then they'll have someone come out. So at this point, we're just like, all right, well, we'll keep going. I've probably just completely ruined the rim of this quad, because I'm just driving on it. And like, well, whatever, I got to get home. And so I think we're at about, I don't know, maybe 2 kilometers out, 3 kilometers out. And we say, okay, Shell, you just get out now. I'll drive this thing. And she goes and gets a taxi back to the place because no one's coming, right? We think someone is, but they don't. And so she gets back. I'm still fighting this thing the whole way. I get around the corner from where we need to drop the thing off, and these guys pull up in a pickup truck to come and help me with it. This flat tire. I'm like, oh yeah, great timing, guys. I might as well just be here. You can walk it back. So I think that was about an hour. The last hour and a half of our quad rental was riding this flat tire, 20 kilometers, 15 kilometers back from the opposite end of the island. Anyway, these guys are sitting there trying to help me with this flat tire, and I'm done with it, right? I'm around the corner, I'm dropping it off, and they're sitting there saying, oh yeah, here, use the pump, and I'm like, you use the pump, I'm done, guys. What's the problem now, But it's a story now, right? I mean, before it would have been, we went quadding on Bocas, but now it's like, we went quadding on Bocas, got a flat tire, had to basically drag the thing back off the beach, and just so many things happened with that quadding adventure. It was really kind of fun. Ironically, with that flat tire, Shell mentioned our trip to Medellin. Well, we went on that bike ride. We were riding down, I don't know what it was, maybe 2 hours into our little tour. I went over a bump, and I get a flat tire on my bicycle.
Oh, my gosh.
And the guide, he's got all the patch kits and stuff like that, but all the glue's dried out. So he has to run to a hardware store so we can get a flat tire fix. So it seems whenever we rent something, we get a flat tire. So I'm not going to rent any bicycles or ATVs anymore.
Yeah. I mean, it's such typical, Latin America, hey? It's, just not prepared for anything to go wrong.
Never.
But you always think, it's not going to happen to me, right? You hear the stories, but but then, like Al said, that's what makes it the story now, because we would have just been like, we went quadding, it was cool, but now, we laugh about it all the time. We're like, oh, remember that time?
Yeah, it's funny how the places...
That's how it becomes your favorite stories, when it's always a catastrophe at the
Usually,
end, right?
Yeah,
it's just funny how the most inconvenient times become, the stories you tell later. We have a couple times where we, felt very much like we're going to die in automobiles in South America. And it's these are the best stories to tell later on.
Well, they are, right? No one wants to hear about just, I rode the bus today and it was great.
It was lovely.
Yeah, that's a great story. Oh, I'm sorry you had to experience that, though. I was right there with you, being oh, this is so frustrating.
Yeah, it does suck. And you're like, what can I do? There's nothing around either. It's just forest of bamboo and palm trees and...
Well, lesson learned a little bit, because we shouldn't, we try to be a little bit more on the frugal side when we're traveling, but I guess now sometimes it's just better to pay top dollar and maybe not have an accident.
We learned afterwards, too, that the more expensive outfitter, they actually have their own course as well. And so you can go and play around on their quad course, I guess, and it's private property. So it's hindsight's 20/20, but yeah.
But at the time, $20 was $20.
It was. I mean, that's...
And $20 goes a long way when you're somewhere like Panama or...
Well, exactly, right? I mean, there's all your meals for the day, right? So, I mean...
That's 20 beers at the beach bar. I mean, are you kidding me?
Yeah, no, definitely. I totally get that. I think it is something that we slowly learned as well when we were in South America. Just okay, we'll spend a little bit more on this bus ride, and this bus ride will be a little bit more pleasant for us.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, you always have to factor that in, right? So.
Mm-hmm. Did they charge you guys anything for the flat tire?
No.
Oh, like because we wrecked the rim, probably?
Yeah.
No, it was literally, we walked away. Like I was standing there and the guy, like Al said, was trying to get Al to help him pump it back up. And we're like, we're like 5 minutes before our 4 hours is up. So see you later.
They probably filled it up and had it back out the next day.
Oh yeah, that same day, right?
Yeah. For the next sucker.
Yeah, really.
All right. Awesome.
That's a great story. Thank you so much for sharing that with us.
Oh, you're welcome.
Thanks for having us.
Awesome.
And a big thank you to Shelly and Al for being a part of this podcast episode. If you guys want to learn more about them, you can visit sellallyourstuff.com and check out their stuff on selling your stuff, becoming a minimalist, house sitting. And we also did a longer episode with them where we interviewed them more in depth about their house sitting gigs and selling their stuff, etc. And we'll put a link for that on the show notes. And so now we've gotten to the point in the episode where we're going to tell our best travel stories. And for those of you who have followed along with the podcast, we've told a lot of stories on the podcast. So we may have told these stories before, but we'll tell them a little bit more in depth. And so I'm going to start. And the story that I'm going to tell is from when we were backpacking in Southeast Asia in 2011. And we went to Laos. And we only went to Laos for about a week, which was kind of crazy because we paid about 50 Canadian dollars just to get the visa. So just not really a smart travel move to begin with. But we'd heard about this famous river tubing that you could do in Vang Vieng. And since then, they've actually shut down the river tubing, which for good reason, as you'll find out in a minute with my story. But we had heard that it was really cool and it was something that we really wanted to do. So we made our way all the way up to Laos, paid the money to get into the country, and then went there primarily for the river tubing. And for those of you who haven't been to Laos, it's lush, it's green, there's mountains, it's spectacular. I think it's an outdoor paradise, but you know, people, especially backpackers, were going primarily to Vang Vieng just for the river tubing. And we had heard about the river tubing long before we even got to Southeast Asia. But once we were over in Southeast Asia, we heard from more people who had actually done it. And we began hearing quite a few horror stories of people who had fallen in the river with an open wound and who had ended up getting like a serious infection. And one guy even had to get transported back to Bangkok because his infection was so bad and it was like going gangrene, and people who get like eye infections and people who were just getting sick from the river. And so we'd already decided we were going to do the river tubing, but both of us were like, okay, we're not going in the river. We're going to stay in our tubes. The only thing that's going to get wet is our butts. Like, we're not putting our heads under for sure. Like, we're going to be dry the entire time. We'll just have like a super chill time. And so the day of, we got up a little bit later and we went for like a late lunch because we wanted to have food in our bellies when we went, because drinking is a huge thing with the river tubing. And then we made our way down to this area where you go and you get your tube. And so you get a tube rental and they attach it to your name and they tell you you have to be back by 6 p.m. And it's like noon at this point. So we're like, okay, no problem. We'll definitely be back by 6 p.m. And we hop in kind of I guess it's like a bus, but it's like a Asian style bus. So it's open aired and you're kind of just in the back. There's like long seats just along the back. And there's a bunch of us that pile in and we meet some people from Australia and from the UK. And we're like, okay, cool. There's some awesome people doing this. Like, this is going to be really fun. And so they drive you to the starting point and they basically take you across the river with your tube. And before you even get in your tube, you're at this bar basically drinking buckets. And if anyone hasn't been to Southeast Asia, buckets are pretty dangerous because they put pretty much like 13 ounces, or what we call Mickey in Canada, into this bucket and then fill it with mix. And so you get your first bucket. They're doing shots as soon as you step off. And, you know, Ryan and I were still like, okay, no, it's cool. Like, we're still not going to get wet. We're going to just still have a really chill time. And we had like a bucket or so, and then we hop into the river. We're still only getting our butts wet, and we head down the river to go to the next bar. And we're with our group of friends at this point. And basically what happens is, as you go down the river, local people from the bars that are along the river are throwing ropes at you to try and get you to hold the rope, and then they pull you in. It's super dangerous because they attach something heavy to the end, and Ryan got hit in the junk, and I mean, that's pretty bad, but getting hit in the head could be way worse, especially in the water. And so by this point, we've been at the first bar for like probably 2 hours at least. And so we begin making our way down, and we go down a couple, avoiding the ropes before we decide to get pulled into one. And so we go into this one and we step off, and this guy, you know, hands us the bucket that we get there, because with what you've paid for with your tube ticket is that you also get complimentary, like one complimentary bucket at each bar that you go to, or something like that. There was something that was like that. I can't remember exactly what. But so they're like pouring shots down our throat, and then they hand us like some form of drug, which is super illegal. And we're like, this is a bad idea, but we're kind of drunk. So I was like, oh, this is a great idea. Ryan's like, this is a terrible idea. We're throwing these away. And so that just shows like kind of the effects of drinking a bucket, first of all. And then there's the swing, and it's basically like a rope swing that you swing out into the water. And so a couple people from our group are doing it, and that I'm like, that looks so fun, I want to do it too. And at this point, I have no sort of comprehension of what I'm even doing. I'm just like, that looks really fun, so I'm going to do it. Like, fuck gangrene, like, fuck the dirty water, I just want to go on the swing. So I decided to go on the swing, and I actually feel like really lucky to have had a safe experience with the tubing, because it's super dangerous. There's rocks down there, and I think that I didn't miss them by very much, but I only went on the swing once. And then from there we made our way to the next bar that had something called the death slide, which is super dangerous, and we all went down that a couple times, and it basically shoots you out into the water, but it's like the angle that you shoot at can really impact if you hit rocks or not. And like, luckily none of us hit the rocks. We were in a group of 6 people, but we went down the death side a couple times, then made our way to our final bar with one more sort of like toy thing to play with in the water. And at this bar, it's getting pretty late by this point. It's probably like 4:30 or 5, and we have to be back by 6. And we're getting ready to leave. And then one of the girls is like, my money is gone out of my water pouch. And she kind of just like left it up by like on the deck. And then it's like, this dude who works at the bar had just like taken her money out of her pouch and like wouldn't give it back. So we're there arguing, like, give the money back. No, I didn't take the money. And then it's like, we finally find out that he does take the money. And then I think she ended up negotiating and getting some of it back, but I'm not entirely sure. It was just like this crazy blurred experience at this point, because we'd had so much to drink. And so we hop in our tubes and go down a little bit further, and then end up getting the truck back, like take the truck back. And as we arrive, it's like 5:55, and so we're on time. But what they do there is they actually like push the clock backwards, so they're like, oh no, you're late. And I was like, no, I have a watch on, we're not late, we are on time, and we're a little bit early, like, give us our money back. And so that's part of the scam there, is that they turn the clock back, and then for all the people who are rushing back, which was not just us, there's tons of people who do that, who get caught up with the day, they end up like losing out on their deposit for their tube. And so finally we get our money back, and we make our way back to our hotel. We're like soaking wet from river water. We're coming down from like being day drunk all day. And it was just like this, like, holy crap. Like, that was a crazy experience. And neither of us really drink very much anymore. And it's definitely not something we would do anymore. And we talked about it on a couple different episodes, because it's not really sustainable tourism. It's not really like good tourism. It's not really the type of tourism that I agree with, yet it's easy to get caught up in something that's super fun. So although it was like this crazy experience that makes for a really good story to tell, it's definitely not something that I would engage with again. And I think I can speak for Ryan in saying that we definitely learned our lesson as to drinking copious amounts of alcohol around water in Southeast Asia. And so that's my most ridiculous travel story.
And the thing that I found really amusing about that experience was that there had been this really long lead up of like 2-3 weeks where we'd known about Tubi and Vang Vienne and going up the coast of Vietnam, meeting people who were going the opposite route from Laos through Vietnam, hearing all these terrible stories. And we're like, okay, we're just going to tube, just get like our butts wet in the water, not like do any of these horrible extreme attractions, because like every single bar had something crazy, because the way they competed was who can have the crazier thing in the river. So there's the death slide and that like arm holding rope swing and a blob and
a blob. Yeah, the blob was the third stop that we stopped at.
And like all this other crazy stuff. And then, we get there and there'd been a big flood. So the bridge had washed out and you walk across to the first bar. Everyone stacks up their tubes together. People start pouring Lao down your throat. And like, I think it was like, 30 minutes later, Amanda's like, I'm going off the rope swing. Going in the water.
Well, I mean, that was at the second bar. So it was like 2 hours into the adventure. But yeah, it was crazy how fast it was, like completely like night and day, like completely swapped between like, no, I'm going to be careful, I'm not even going to get drunk, to like, oh, I've had a bucket and a couple of shots, like let's like go off the rope swing, go down the death slide.
Yeah.
Like it's really interesting how even like the smartest and most cautious of people can really lose their like.
Yeah. And like, so people, the reason they took away all the attractions and stuff is like people died. Not a ton, but like, I think like one a year type thing. And it's crazy. I remember thinking at the time, because like people were just not making responsible decisions, like us included, but like we had each other, we had kind of like joined up with a group of people at the start. So I feel like we had like a bit of like a safety net there. Mm-hmm. But it was interesting. I just couldn't help thinking afterwards, like it kind of has something to do with like, as people from North America or Australia, like we grow up in such like nanny states where, there's so many rules and regulations and laws that you don't really take personal responsibility about safety. And then you go over to a full moon party or a tubing thing, and it's just like, it's like Wild West out there. Like,
yeah,
they're just building bars on props on the river. There's like random alcohol. They're giving you joints. They've got crazy slides and stuff, and people just kind of assume, oh, this must be safe because it's being offered to me.
Or like somebody like at a bar offering you a joint, and you're like, oh, this must be legal, and it's like, no, this is like very, very, very illegal, and the government is corrupt enough there that they'll pay people to sell drugs to tourists and then put them in jail for it until you pay your way out.
Yeah, and then it was another, so at the end, they do this like time scam where they change the clock, and we'd read about it on the internet, and it was kind of funny because like looking back on it, you see all these scams and they're all like everyone's running the same scams, so you can read about them on the internet and then just like go through it and handle it. But it's just like it's so funny. And another funny detail about Vang Vienne, in the actual town, all the restaurants and bars played either Family Guy or Friends
on like replay.
Big TVs.
Yeah.
And so like I remember thinking while we were there, like if you were a young person who grew up there, like someone from Laos, like what your view of like what Westerners are like would be so crazy.
Oh yeah.
They must be like, what is wrong with these people?
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, there's a lot of reasons why they've shut down the river tubing in Vang Vienne. And I mean, it's one of those things where it's like, we've kind of talked about, off the microphones, like, oh, is that something that like we regret doing? And there's a part of me that's like, yeah, I mean, I'm really lucky that I didn't break my spine or break my neck or lose my life or drown or something crazy like that, or that we didn't get stuff stolen or get sick from the river, because I think we made a lot of irresponsible decisions that day. But then at the same time, it's like you learn things from those experiences. And I think that having that experience, I now know that
I don't need that type of experience ever again to live an enjoyable life. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Cool. So, what is your best travel story?
So this is another one that's definitely not, well, best is like a weird word to describe it, but it starts in La Paz in Bolivia on our South America trip. We had the day before gone and done the Death Road tour, and if you've never heard of the Death Road, you should definitely go check it out on YouTube. One of the best days traveling we've had.
Or on our Bolivia episode.
Yeah, that too.
Shameless plug.
So we had also booked a trip to the jungle in Bolivia. Bolivia is a crazy country generally, but also just the geography of the country is bizarre. You have like super hot, super dry lowlands, you have like alpine mountains, and then you still have some of the Amazon basin, the pampas and the jungle. So we booked a flight from La Paz, which is the world's highest elevation capital city, to Ruanabaque, which is like a short flight. I think it was only maybe an hour, but you feel like you're in an entirely different world. And so the flight, being that you're in Bolivia on a domestic flight, not a ton of people are flying domestic in Bolivia. I think it was a 2-prop plane. You go over the mountains, down into the jungle, and when you arrive at Ruanabaque, you're kind of like land on the runway. You're like, oh, it's kind of weird. There's like cows grazing on the food, like cows grazing on the grass, literally right beside the runway. And there's like kids playing. And then you go up to the terminal, and the terminal is literally a house. There's a metal detector and a desk, and it's basically in an old house. And there's a bar in a shack that's by the tree out front. So we get out, and we've booked a tour that's supposed to take us out to the pampas, which are the wetlands, just kind of on the edge of the Amazon. And right from the start, things start going wrong. We wait around, and there's no one coming to pick us up. There's a third guy there who we start talking to and find out that he's actually supposed to be on a different tour from ours. But as is the kind of common practice in South America, if you're on a tour, once you've paid for a tour agencies will sell you. You're kind of just like a resource that they'll trade around. So we probably stand around for like 30, 40 minutes until someone in a crazy old blue 4Runner that's from the 70s and kind of like MacGyvered together pulls up, picks us up. We get in the truck, head off into town, and get to the office of the tour company where we're supposed to be meeting up and going on tour. And I think we were expecting at that point to get like into a nicer car, to meet up with our group and to just like start having a pleasant experience. But that wasn't what happened at all. We show up in the office, wait around for a minute or two. Most of everyone who was there gets in a different car and leaves. And then we're like, okay, what's going on? The same guy in the same old beat up blue Toyota 4Runner comes back, and he's like, oh, get in the car. The Czech guy who we were with, who was supposed to be on a different tour, who had been dropped off at a different building, had gotten picked up again and was apparently coming with us. And then also, I think 5 or 6 other people. 4?
I think there was 5.
5 other people get in the vans or in the truck. So there's what normally would be a 5-seat car. They've jerry-rigged a second passenger in the front and a whole bench where the trunk should be. So there's 2 of us in the back, 3 in the middle, 3 in the front. And it's just packed like sardines into this really shitty old truck. And the suspension wasn't working. And as we quickly found out after we got off the few paved roads in Ruanabaque and onto a bumpy dirt road, the car was not going to stand up well to a 2-hour drive along a dirt road. So our driver, who seems kind of sober-ish, is flying along the dirt road way faster than you should be going, given the conditions. And given the condition of the truck, it feels like it's going to fall apart. The suspension doesn't work. I'm stuck in the back seat and my head's kind of like bouncing against the roof every time we hit a bump. And probably like within half an hour, our driver's recklessly passed like all the other tour companies, kind of like as if he was racing them. And then we go through a muddy stretch and we kind of just like skid and then veer off and like don't steer away, but kind of move into the ditch. And we're all like a little bit nervous, like, oh, that was kind of crazy. Car just crashed. Not really scary, but just like, oh, this driver's kind of annoying. But hopefully he'll chill out after. But can't get the car out of the mud, so another tour driver comes by, drags him out, and we're like, okay, hopefully this is going to work better going forward. We all hop back in the truck, start motoring on again, and everyone was assuming like, okay, this guy's probably learned his lesson, he's probably going to chill out, but he still just keeps going way faster than you'd think, like 80 or 90 kilometers an hour down this dirt road, passing all these other trucks who had just fished him out of the dirt. And then probably within 20, 30 minutes, exact same thing happens. But this time the steering's broken. So we fish the car out and have to just get out of the car, stand around, and just wait. You're out in the middle of nowhere. There's a dirt road with kind of like swampland on either side, bugs around, nowhere really to stand. It's hot, you're uncomfortable, and the driver is under the truck with like elastic bands and duct tape trying to like jerry-rig this thing back together. And then he removes a part, which I'm assuming had something to do with the steering, and it's lying on the ground, and we're like, okay, what's the deal here? He gets back in the truck and he's like, let's go, let's go. And someone is like, hey, there's a part on the ground. And he's like, no, don't worry about it. He spoke Spanish, so not great English, but fairly clearly communicated. Get back in the truck. We're all kind of nervous now because we're like, okay, there's parts missing. You just left them on the road. Like, clearly the steering doesn't work on this car. And he, once again, just back up, roaring speeds, continues on down the road, continues past the cars who have helped him out of the ditch again, and we get up to a small town probably 15, 20 minutes further down the road. And we're, I don't know, at least an hour late at this point before we should have already been where we were going, but we're not even close yet. We're behind on lunch. We feel like we're really getting the short end of the stick here when it comes to this tour. And we get to the town, and the driver stops, and he gets out, and he goes to the back, and he's like looking for the part, and that's clearly just been left on the road that we tried to tell him about. And then he kind of comes to the realization that he just left it in the dirt back 15 minutes before. So he starts to turn the car around, and we're all like, no. Like, we need to get out of the car. We're not coming back with you. We're just going to wait here. So the guy doesn't seem to mind. He gets back in the car, goes all the way back, and about half an hour later comes back, picks us up, and we finally can carry on at a more reasonable speed into town to get lunch. And then from that point, we kind of meet up with the other part of the tour group and continue on in a safer-ish manner to the spot where we get picked up by boats to go out for our Rurrenabaque trip. And so it was one of probably the most nerve-wracking moments we've had traveling, just being stuck in this car for like an hour and a half or 2 hours as this guy kind of rips and rips around. The car keeps braking, crashed twice. And it was one of those moments where you're like, I wish I wasn't on this tour right now. But it ended up kind of being worth it. Our tour out in the Pampas was really good. We got to swim with pink dolphins and go look for piranhas and just experience the jungle. It was really cool.
We saw a sloth.
Yeah, all sorts of cool creatures out there. And so 2 days later, we come back in. And we're like, okay, that car was like literally falling apart. There is no way that guy or that car are going to be taking us back. Thank God that's over. We've like survived this trial and tribulation. Like, we've made it through. We're not going to die today. And so we get back into the mainland where the boats meet the cars. We're standing around waiting because whoever's supposed to be our driver isn't there yet. The other part of the tour group goes. It's just kind of us again, the same people who came in the blue Jeep, and we're standing there waiting around, and when you know it, a shitty blue Toyota 4Runner comes cruising around the corner, pulls up, and we're like, oh crap, we're doing this again. So go through, get back in the car, pack in, and suffer through 2 hours again, but thankfully no crashes, no broken parts. I don't know how that car is still running, but we made it back to Ruanabake, to the house airport, flew back to La Paz, and made it safely out of the jungle.
Yeah, I forgot about that, how epic that journey was. I distinctly remember getting off the boat on the way back, and I was like, there's no way I'm going in that blue car again. Like, I am not getting back in that blue Jeep. Like, we have to get in with somebody else. And then it's like, nope, it's like blue Jeep is there, and like everyone else gets in different cars, and it's like, nope, you took the blue Jeep here, you have to take the blue Jeep home. And I was like, no. Just like so atrocious.
Yeah, I remember that everyone was kind of like, yeah, we're in this, we're demanding something different.
Yeah, it's like,
yeah.
You can't do anything when you're in the middle of nowhere. It's not like you can just call a cab. Like, it's literally the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, and it's crazy though, just so many times traveling we've been in cars where we've thought we're going to die.
Yeah. So that concludes our best travel stories episode. And if anyone else has a travel story out there that they really want to share with us, shoot us an email or message us on Facebook and just let us know what your travel story is and that sort of thing. I think that we'll probably do another episode like this at some point and share more travel stories, because it's always fun to get people together and just hear the funny things that have happened to people while traveling the world. And as always, you can check out the show notes at theworldwanderers.com, and thank you for listening.
To find more information, relevant links, and photos talked about in this week's episode, check out theworldwanderers.com.
If you have a question, comment, or feedback, send us an email at info@theworldwanderers.com. Join our community on Facebook at The World Wanderers or on Twitter at WorldWanderers1. As always, thanks so much for listening.
Have a great day.
Bye.